I sat stiffly on the cold wooden bench, my hands gripping the fabric of my skirt so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The courtroom was filled with murmurs, soft whispers floating through the air like tiny echoes of uncertainty. My little brother Daniel sat beside me, his legs swinging slightly beneath the chair, his small hands fidgeting in his lap. He was only 10, too young to understand everything that was happening. But at the same time, old enough to know that today would change our lives forever. Mom sat on the other side of him, her face pale, her tired eyes fixed on the judge. She looked so small, so fragile, like she was trying to disappear into herself. She had barely slept in days, and I knew why. This case, this moment, was everything. Across the room, sitting on the other side of the courtroom, was our father. He looked calm, too calm, like he already knew he would win. His lawyer sat beside him, flipping through papers, whispering something in his ear. Dad barely acknowledged us, acting as if we were strangers instead of the family he had abandoned. The judge cleared his throat, and the room instantly fell silent. He adjusted his glasses and looked over the papers in front of him. This custody hearing is to determine the best living arrangement for the children, Daniel and Emily Carter, the judge began, his voice deep and steady. Both parties have made their case. Now we will proceed with final statements before reaching a decision. My heart pounded. This was it. The moment where our future would be decided by someone who didn't really know us, didn't know what we had been through. My father's lawyer stood up first. He was a tall man with sharp features, the kind of person who never showed any emotion. Your Honor, he began smoothly. Mr. Carter is more than capable of providing a stable home for his children. He has a successful career, financial security, and the means to ensure they have everything they need. He paused, glancing at us before continuing. There is no evidence that the children would be unsafe in his care. I swallowed hard. How could they say that? How could they pretend everything was fine when we knew the truth? The judge nodded, then turned to Mom's lawyer, a kind but firm woman who had fought for us from the beginning. She stood confidently and faced the judge. Your Honor, stability is not just about financial security. It's about emotional safety, about trust and well-being, she said. Mrs. Carter has been the primary caregiver for these children. She's been there for them in every way, ensuring they feel loved, supported, and protected. I reached for Daniel's hand under the table and squeezed it. He squeezed back, but his little fingers were ice cold. The judge sighed and leaned back in his chair. Thank you, I will now. Before he could finish, Daniel suddenly stood up. Gasps filled the courtroom. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel, sit down. Mom whispered urgently, trying to pull him back into his seat, but he didn't listen. Instead, he turned to the judge, his small chest rising and falling with shaky breaths, his hands balled into fists at his sides. I have something to say, he said, his voice trembling but determined. The entire courtroom froze. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Son, this is highly unusual. I don't care, Daniel blurted out. You need to hear the truth. I stared at him, my heart slamming against my ribs. What was he about to say? And why did he look so afraid? The room was silent, so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Everyone was staring at Daniel. Even the judge looked taken aback, his thick eyebrows raised in surprise. Daniel, Mom whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. Sit down, sweetheart. But Daniel didn't move. His little body was stiff, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I had never seen him like this before, so determined, so sure of himself. He was only 10 years old, but in that moment, he looked braver than any of us had ever been. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Young man, do you understand that anything you say here will be taken seriously? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. Very well, the judge said, leaning forward slightly. What do you want to say? Daniel took a deep breath. I could see the way his small shoulders shook, the way he was trying so hard to be strong. Then he turned and looked directly at our father. You're lying, Daniel said, his voice louder than before. You don't want us because you love us. You want us so you can control us, just like you controlled Mom. A stunned silence fell over the room. My breath caught in my throat. Dad's face darkened. Daniel, sit down, he snapped, his voice sharp like a whip. But Daniel stood his ground. No, he shouted, his little voice echoing in the courtroom. His eyes were wet with unshed tears, but he refused to back down. "You act like you're this great dad, but you don't care about us. You never did. You only care about winning, about making Mom look bad." I felt my mother's hand tighten on my arm. She looked just as shocked as I felt, her eyes wide, her lips slightly parted. Daniel turned back to the judge, his breathing uneven. "You don't know what he's really like," he continued, his voice cracking. He makes people feel small. He makes people scared. He made Mom cry almost every night. And when we were with him, Daniel's voice broke. He wiped his sleeve across his face, trying to pull himself together. I felt my whole body tense. I knew what he was about to say. I had spent years trying to protect him from it, trying to shield him from the worst of our father's anger. But deep down, I had always feared that he had seen more than I thought. The judge leaned forward, his expression serious now. "Daniel," he said gently, "has your father ever hurt you?" Daniel hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. My breath hitched. Murmurs spread through the courtroom like wildfire. Even our father's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Our dad slammed his hand on the table. "This is nonsense," he barked. "He's just a kid. He doesn't know what he's talking about." But the judge wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at Daniel, at the way his little hands shook, at the raw emotion in his voice. "Daniel," the judge said carefully, "I need you to be very honest with me. Has your father ever hit you?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked down at the floor, his face twisting with emotion. Then finally he whispered, "Not me, but he hurt Emily." The world seemed to stop. A gasp escaped my lips. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. I could feel every single pair of eyes on me now, but all I could do was stare at Daniel. He knew. After all this time, after all the lies and secrets, he knew. Tears welled up in my eyes, and suddenly I wasn't sitting in that courtroom anymore. I was back in our old house, standing in the hallway, hearing the sound of Dad's voice raised in anger. Feeling the sharp sting of his grip on my wrist, the fear, the helplessness. I thought I had hidden it from Daniel. I thought I had protected him. But I was wrong. The judge's expression changed. He wasn't just listening anymore, he was taking this very seriously. "Emily," he said, turning to me now, "is that true?" My throat felt tight. I could barely breathe. But then I felt Daniel's hand slip into mine under the table, just like I had done for him so many times before. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. I wasn't alone. Taking a deep breath, I finally found my voice. "Yes," I whispered. And just like that, the entire case changed. The courtroom was completely silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air is pressing down on you, waiting for something to shatter it. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had just said it. The words I had buried deep inside for so long were now out in the open. Yes. I could feel my father's eyes burning into me from across the room, but I didn't dare look at him. I kept my gaze on my hands. Gripping Daniel so tightly, I was afraid I might hurt him, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he squeezed back as if telling me, "It's okay. I've got you now." The judge's face had changed. He no longer looked like a man simply deciding a case. Now he looked concerned, serious in a way that made my stomach twist. "Emily," he said gently, "can you tell me what happened?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat felt like it was closing. I wasn't sure I could do this. But then I felt my mother's eyes on me. Slowly, I turned my head and met her gaze. There were tears in her eyes, but not just sadness. There was something else, something stronger. Love. For so long, she had been trapped, just like we were. But she had gotten out. She had fought for us. And now it was my turn. I took a shaky breath and sat up a little straighter. "When I was younger," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "he would grab me, not just to discipline me. Not just because he was mad. He would squeeze my arm so tight it left marks. Sometimes he'd throw things. Once, I tried to stop him from yelling at Mom, and I swallowed hard. He pushed me into the table," I finally said. I hit my head. I didn't tell anyone because I thought maybe it was my fault. A quiet sob broke through the room. It was Mom. She covered her mouth with both hands, her whole body shaking. I turned back to Daniel. His small face was set in a deep frown, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in him before. Anger. Not at me. At him. I finally forced myself to look at my father. For the first time ever, he looked afraid. His face had paled, his hands clenched into fists, but there was something in his eyes I had never seen before. Panic. "Your Honor, this is absurd," his lawyer jumped in, scrambling to regain control. "There is no evidence of this. It's the word of a child and a teenager against their father. This is clearly an attempt to sway the court." But the judge wasn't even looking at him. He was still looking at me. "Emily," he said carefully, "why didn't you say anything before?" I hesitated, then said the truth. Because I was scared. My voice was stronger now. Because I thought no one would believe me. I paused, then looked at Daniel. Because I wanted to protect him. A fresh wave of whispers spread through the room. The judge sat back in his chair, his face unreadable. Then he turned to the bailiff. "Bring in child services," he said. My father shot up from his chair. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "She's making this up. I'm their father. The judge banged his gavel. "Enough, Mr. Carter," he said sternly. "Given the nature of these allegations, I am ordering an immediate investigation. Until then, all custody and visitation rights are suspended." Mom gasped. Daniel let out a small breath of relief. I felt something inside me crack open. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared anymore. The sound of the gavel still echoed in my ears, a symbol of the decision that had just been made. The weight of it felt surreal. Almost like I was floating above the courtroom, watching everything unfold from a distance. I couldn't believe it. We were finally free. But the moment wasn't all joy. The truth had been said, and now there were consequences to face. I saw my father's face, red with fury, as he stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyer scrambling behind him. His outburst was more than just frustration. It was the fear of losing control, something he had always held so tightly to. I turned to look at Mom. Her face was pale, but her eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in so long. Hope. It was like the heavy weight that had been sitting on her shoulders for all these years had finally lifted. She was still trembling, but this time it was different. It was relief. "Mom?" Daniel whispered, his small voice breaking through the silence. She turned to him, her lips trembling, and pulled him into her arms. "I'm so proud of you, sweetie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're so brave." And for a moment, everything was perfect. In her embrace, I could see the family we had lost, the family we thought we could never have again. I wanted to stay there, in that moment, forever. But I knew that life wasn't that simple. The road ahead would still be hard. The courtroom slowly emptied, and we were left standing in the middle of the room, the reality of everything slowly sinking in. "I didn't think we'd make it," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. Mom looked at me, her eyes soft. "I didn't either. But we did." I glanced at Daniel, who was now clinging to her, his head resting on her shoulder. I had spent so many years trying to protect him, trying to shield him from the pain of what we had gone through. But in the end, it wasn't just me who had protected him. It was him who had protected me. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said suddenly, his voice small. "I didn't want to tell. I thought you'd be mad." My heart squeezed. I knelt down in front of him and took his hands in mine. "Never," I said softly. "I'm not mad. I'm proud of you. You did the right thing." Mom's voice broke through again, a tremor in it. "We're going to be okay now. You and me, we're going to be okay." We walked out of the courthouse together, side by side, the weight of years of pain and fear finally lifting off our shoulders. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like we had a chance. A real chance at healing. And as we walked down the steps toward the future we had longed for, I knew one thing for sure. We were free. We were free. Thank you for watching. Daniel's bravery in sharing the truth changed everything for his family, and we hope this story touched your heart as much as it did ours. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to us and helps us bring more powerful stories your way. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so comment below and let us know how this story made you feel. And if you think someone else needs to hear this message, please share it with them. Let's continue to spread love, hope, and courage together.